Okay, so thank you for coming today. This has been a joint project of many people in the Agriculture Commission, many others who let us scan their slides so we have the old pictures. I want to thank Jim Neely here for the tech support so we know that everything will run. This will be recorded today by Odie Wheeler. He works at GCTV, so the pictures and the sound will be available together. Also, we want to thank the Historical Society. They partnered with us to sponsor this, and all of the AgCom members. Want to remember to turn off your phones, please. And for those of you that don't know me, I grew up here in Shelburne on Little Mohawk Road. The picture that you saw in any of the advertising was the farm that I grew up on. My maiden name was Gowdy, and my mother was a Reynolds, so when I talk about my grandparents, I'm talking about Maud and Stanley Reynolds. I'll try to remember to do that. And I do have some maps in the presentation this time to help you orient where I'm talking about in town. So thank you. We'll start the presentation. Okay, the members of the Shelburne Agriculture Committee are Becky Ashton, Courtney Basil, Sarah Davis, Jonathan Graves, Ernie Kelly, Rudy Holy, Lonnie York, and myself. So it's co-sponsored today by the Shelburne Historical Society. I wanted to do a couple of sunrise pictures to make sure you're all awake. So if you see the one next to you nodding off, just give them a little poke. We have 10 farms in Shelburne that have been in the same family for over 100 years. One of them is the Coombs Farm. There, the barn is in Shelburne, the house is in Coleraine. Cooper Lane Farm, now in the Gould family. Hawks Farm, now the Heron family. Graves Glen Farm, the Graves family. Dole Farm, still the Doles. Maple Row Farm, the Williams. Apex Orchards, the Smiths. Kelly Farm, Kelly's. Wheelie Farm, that's my husband John and I, and the Davenport Farm. So this is the original map of the Patton District. The Patton is in the northern part of Shelburne. It was made in 1952, and we're thinking of getting it updated because there's a lot of new families now. So I put a map in the presentations now so to give you an idea where I'm talking about. So I'm going to be talking about, at first, some of the schools and places in Shelburne. So at the corner of Reynolds Road and Patton Road, there used to be a schoolhouse. This was the old schoolhouse that was there from 1807 to 1902. And there's some of the schoolhouse gang, my grandfather and his sister included. And then they started a new school in 1902. The school teacher lived with a local family, so the school teacher lived with my grandparents, the Reynolds, often. And Alberta Hathaway was one who came to teach there. This is a copy of her first contract. She would get $1,000 per year. It was started in November 8th, and she was supposed to let them know November 17th, which is just a week, and get started teaching. Here's some of the new schoolhouse students with my mother, my aunt, lots of Davenport schools, Sam Risky's, all the neighborhood kids. At that time, or early on, the Bartles Ferry train station was where the post office was. I have many letters that were addressed to my great-grandparents that were addressed to just Bartles Ferry, Mass. that station was built in 1868. So we'll start with another just local scene. This is Shelburne Center. You can see the church there. You see how open the hill is. So here's the church. This building was called the vestry. It was a kind of a community hall. They had suppers there and lots of different events. And that was taken down in the early 1950s. There was another school down here. This is Bartles Ferry Road that comes down here. So there was a school here. And this place on the corner was a tea room. Not the Sweetheart Tea Room, but just another Shelburne tea room. But see how open it is there. You'll notice that in a lot of the pictures that everything was raised, so everything was open. It's changed a lot. Now, how many of you have ever heard of the Pool Kellogg Tavern? I don't see any hands here. Okay? This is the Pool Kellogg Tavern. It was built in 1820. And you can see the church up here and the wagon sheds. And if you stood on the steps of the church that's there now and looked down toward the stone library, this Pool Kellogg Tavern was on that hillside there. It was, as I said, built in 1820 as a tavern. It had many rooms in it for a rooming house. Then it was made into apartments. The last person that owned it was Ted Cromack. Maybe some of you know him and his family. It burned part of it burned in 1948. Then the fire department was able to burn the rest of it to clean it up. But you see, there's no sign of it there now, but it's quite a big building with the pillars, quite a nice tavern. Shelburne had a lot of taverns, actually, early on. Okay, so we're going to start. This is a map from 1895, and this red line here is Route 2. Obviously, it wasn't there in 1895, but I drew it on the map just to give you some sense of reference of where other things are. Little Mohawk Road that starts by the church and the Grange Hall goes up here. And we're going to start out on Anderson Road, the Anderson Dole Farm. So this is John Anderson, grandfather of Steve Dole. So you can see him with the shorthorn bull and the bull staff. Rudy Holy found this in his high school yearbook. He graduated in 1919. So, quite the gentleman. This might be a little hard to see, but often when they took pictures, all the people dressed up, they got their horses in the picture. Everybody was there because they didn't take pictures very often. And Steve Dole showed the shorthorns at many of the fairs, and Francis Barnard, also from Shelburne, was a rival. There were a lot of shorthorn cattle at that time in Shelburne. This one was Rome Duke, who was owned by John Anderson. I'm not sure if it's a painting or what, but kind of a different shape than you see cattle now. And here's Steve Dole as an older fellow in his room with the picture of Rome Duke. And I did put on, his name was actually Stevens with an S on the end, Dole. And here's George and Bucky Dole. Many of you probably knew them, carpenters that built all sorts of buildings all around the area. Just great people and great carpenters. This was a milking shorthorn sale and show, and you can see it was 1970. There was Bucky Dole, George Dole, Bill Hathaway, Alan Kress, and we at the back, Lonnie Gould. Okay, back to the map again. We're going to go now on Patton Road. If you start up Little Mohawk Road, and right here, there's a sign, the Patton Map sign. Patton Road starts there and goes up this way and out this way to where Patton Hill Farm is now. So we'll go to the farms on Patton Road. This is one, many of us who grew up here knew it as the Arthur Green Farm. Now the Poppies live there. Many of these pictures that I have were made from old glass negatives. Guy McClellan lived in the house where I grew up on Little Mohawk Road and was a photographer and had a lot of glass negatives, and some of the others are made from those old glass negatives from the 1920s. And there's another view of what is now the Popley Farm. Then the Truesdell Farm, farther up on Patton Road. If this cow was standing there today, she'd be standing in the beaver pond that's off to the right side of the road there. But you see the old fence and the Asher cow with the long horns. And there's some more of the Ashers also. They would be in the beaver pond at this point. The Truesdells had a sugar house on Reynolds Road, and this picture is Dale Truesdell and his father Parker Truesdell sugaring in the 1950s. You see the horses and sap tank, and there's a picture of their sugar house, which is down kind of over the bank from Reynolds Road. This is Patton Hill Farm. Many people know of Patton Hill Farm now at the end of Patton Road before it heads down the hill into Coleraine. This is the second house built by Elisha Barnard. The reason it's the second house was he was going to get married, and the whole town had come together to build a house for him and his bride. They were working on the house and took a break for lunch, and a fire started and burned a lot of the house, but he was still going to get married in just 6 weeks. So the town, worked together, and he had a house by the time he got married. So I think it's been added to since then, but this one was built in 1790. Here's another older picture of the Patton farmhouse, the Barnards. I believe one of the children was Ellsworth Barnard, Dutchy Barnard, which many of you know, that donated the land for the high ledges. And this was a later picture. The silos always seemed to be the first thing to go when a barn was not being used. Now we're going to go. Tower Road actually isn't on this map. As I said, it's an 1895 map. So this is Patton Road that goes up here, but off over this way would be Tower Road, where the Davenports are, and then over here is Cooper Lane Road that comes down to Route 2. So this is on Tower Road. Walter Davenport, an ancestor of Norm Davenport and the ones that are there now, was taking milk to Box Corner. And from what Norm Davenport said, Box Corner was at the corner of Little Mohawk Road and Frank Williams Road. Apparently they met there somewhere to load the milk cans on something else, take them to the railroad in Shelburne Falls. Here's another picture of Walter Davenport, 1915. A lot of snow back then. And here's Russell Davenport and Norm Davenport in their sugar house there on Tower Road. A newer evaporator than the one that the Truesdells were using in one of the previous pictures. And here's Russell Davenport, probably putting out sap buckets, and 4 generations of the Davenport family. Then Cooper Lane Road goes down this way. That's where the Gould family was. So here's a picture of the barns there at the top of Cooper Lane Road, where Helen and Edgar lived. Here's a picture of Linda Gould Herrera and Lonnie Gould York showing the Shorthorns. As I said, the Shorthorns were very popular then. And here's a picture of Helen Gould with a Shorthorn cow. No indication of the year on that, quite a while ago. There they are gathering sap. This was from a newspaper article in 2008. I don't recognize who's there. And then Edgar Gould did a lot with border collies and sheep and training border collies to herd sheep. So there's some of the border collies in action. You probably all know about Gould Sugar House. This is a picture of a newspaper article from 1969 with lots of cars there, lots of business. Gould Sugar House was open for 60 years, and Helen was the person that was there to welcome people for the entire 60 years. And that's a more recent picture of Gould Sugar House today, which we all miss. Now we're going to go to Little Mohawk Road. So we'll start here in Shelburne Center by the church and go up through Little Mohawk Road into Coleraine. So at the bottom of Little Mohawk Road, it's the Jaguar residence now that used to be called Dragon Brook Lodge. And in the history of Shelburne, it said at one point it was a nursing home for elderlies. That's the way they worded it, elderlies. The Goldthwait buildings are no longer there. This was a painting from Maniati that was at the bank, and someone took a picture of it for me so I could put it in the presentation. It was originally Addison Goldthwait that was there on Little Mohawk Road. And we did have just one picture of the old barn and silo there. Those burned several years ago, sadly. And then this was the second house erected by where the big beaver pond is on Little Mohawk Road. It was Jimmy Baker's house. His real name was Harold E. Baker, and they ran a creamery there and had the cream top bottles. And his bottles say Harold E. Baker, but everyone knew him as Jimmy. I don't know why. But this was the second house was there because the first one had burned. This one was erected in 1882, and this one burned in the early 1900s, I think about 1928. There were a lot of houses that burned back then. This one is also from one of those old glass negatives from Guy McClellan. And you can see the Long's barn over here. Maybe you know of it as the Gordon Long place and the house. And then this is where Guy McClellan lived. And then after that, my family, the Gowdies, lived there. And you can see the Reynolds house up here. But you see how clear it is everywhere. That's another picture of Gordon Long's barn, sometime before 1920. That barn was taken down in the 1970s, but a big, beautiful farm. This is the house that was built there in 1784. 9 generations of the Long family lived in that house. Here's another picture of it. The house had an L and another barn there. Quite a lot of buildings there. And a lot of sap buckets. The Longs also had a sugar house and had all their sap buckets washed up here. This is another picture of them getting in hay. And you can see over here the woman with the horse and a child there. You know, everybody wanted to get in on the pictures. And I believe it's oxen that are pulling the wagon of hay. This was the front door. It was still there in January of this year, built in 1784, as I said, with the original hinges. Kind of a unique locking system, but it worked. Each side of the door was made from one wide board with a hole cut in it for a window. And the boards on either side, each of them is just one really wide board. The boards that they put on the roof when they made the house were about 2 feet wide. Just really wide boards there. Oops. And this was hinge on the door, the original door that went to the cellar, with the wooden hinge and the leather washers to make it work better. So something we hadn't seen commonly. Another picture of the Gordon Long farm with many of the Long family. And lest you think that things were simpler or better back then, they weren't. One of the children that was born here was cut by a hay fork and died of tetanus. They had no way to cure that. And the roads weren't always great either. Farther up Little Mohawk Road, this is the McClellan Gowdy farm. Now our daughter and her family, the Dubrills, live there. I grew up there and never knew that there was a silo there. There was no sign of it at all. But when my mother went through some of the old glass negatives, she found this picture of them putting the corn into the silo. It doesn't look very, I don't know, very effective. I think a lot of the corn must have fallen off the elevator, but that's what they were trying to do. It would have been for silage, but as you see, it wasn't chopped up very much. So the more you chop it up, the better it will ferment and cure as silage. But I'm not sure. It doesn't look very efficient at all. And I'm guessing that maybe they had the gas engine that was running it, because we didn't get electricity at our farm until 1927. So they had electricity in Panama before we had electricity here. Here's another picture of piling wood there on the farm. And this is a picture of Guy McClellan driving the horses, and my grandfather, Stanley Reynolds, planting potatoes. This is just in back of the barn there. And up at the top, you can see at the corner of Reynolds Road and Little Mohawk Road was a schoolhouse that they called the Dublin Schoolhouse. Now, it's not the Irish planting the potatoes, so the Reynolds were English, okay? So, but there were a lot of Irish people in the area, the Lawsons, the McClellans, the Hardys, and they all had a bunch of kids. So that was called the Dublin Schoolhouse. And there's another picture of it taken from where our farm is now. You can see how clear everything was at that time, and it looks like it was about to fall down. And this is just a picture of the snowplow from 1940. A lot of snow then, and this plow had tracks on it like a bulldozer instead of wheels like a truck. Then farther up the road, there was the Sambriski family. They had 5 children there, very nice house. The house is gone now, but the garage and the barn are still there. And there's one of the sheds and a view off to the east. And then this is the view from the Sambriski farm over towards Coombs Hill. And you see the apple orchard over here and the buildings from Coombs Hill farm. In the valley between where Sambriskis are and the Coomses was the Vance family. And this is an old picture of their barn. Again, the silo is missing now. The silos seem to be the first things to fall down once they were empty. Coombs Hill Farm has been there since 1752. The barn here, right here, is in Shelburne, and the house is in Coleraine. Deacon James Wilson was the first one there on the farm. And at that time, you had to go to church in the town where you lived. He wanted to go to church in Coleraine, So he bought just enough land in Coleraine so he could live in Coleraine and go to church there. So all the other buildings are relatives of the original Coombs family. And this is an old picture. I think the cattle were walking in the road. I'm not sure why. But that was the original house that was built there. And like many other old houses, that house burned, and the house that is there now was built after that. John Coombs was from Coleraine. I know this is a Shelburne history, but he was one, oh, I'm sorry, who could find water. He'd use an apple or a willow, kind of Y-shaped branch, and he could find water and tell you even how deep it was, how far you'd have to go to get water. So pretty amazing to be able to do that. And nobody's ever explained how that happens to work. Okay, now we're going to go over, this is Little Mohawk Road that we just went up. We're going to take a left here and go onto Reynolds Road, which goes around that way. This is the original, the Reynolds farm. You can see there it has the house, the barns, the silos, and whatnot. This is a picture of the linen, which Archibald Lawson, who came from Ireland in the 1750s, he bought the land for a yard of linen cloth for an acre of land. He was a weaver, and this linen had been passed down through the inhabitants of the house. It had been given to the Historical Society, and thankfully they gave it back, so I now have it in my museum at the farm. Here's some of the views from the farm. You can see how open everything was. This is the early 1900s, looking down toward the Sam Risky farm. And then a snow picture. You can see how much open land there was around at that time. Here's a picture of the Reynolds farm from 1919. You see how much hay they had piled up there. And this shows the old barn and the silo, not the best quality picture, but in 1951, the barn caught fire, and it was in January. Enough fire departments came so that they could hitch the hoses together and pump water from the pond at the bottom of the hill, so that they managed to save the house. And then other barns were built. There's Stanley Reynolds as a teenager driving the horses, the hired man in the middle, and then Stanley's father, William or Charlie Reynolds, in the early 1900s. It kind of looks like the Old West. And in 1911 was the first year that you could hunt deer, and Stanley Reynolds got a deer that year. He sent it out to New York to the Crosby Christian Fur Company to have the hide tanned. And it says on the picture of the animal there, "I am pure Galloway. When I go hence, I want Crosby to tan my hide for a robe." And this is the bill for it. It cost $1.50 and then $3.50 for the lining, so $5 for the whole hide tanned. And that was on the floor in our front room for until about the 1980s. So there's my mother and her sister. People ask, what did kids do for entertainment back then? Well, that was one way they entertained themselves, I guess. Here's another picture of winter of 1931, coming up Reynolds Road. A lot of snow back then. And one big horsepower, nice Belgian horse that We now have a 100 horsepower tractor. I'm glad we don't have to have 100 horses to make up that. Here's my dad, Hank Gowdy, raking hay back in the 1940s. It's looking down towards Little Mohawk Road. And there they are standing by the hay pile. Stanley Reynolds on the left, Maud Reynolds, always wearing a dress, and then Max Dwyer in the middle, and my dad, Hank Gowdy. There was a hay fork that was up in the barn that would come down and kind of grab a batch of hay, and the horse, it would run on a pulley. The horse would pull the hay fork out into the barn, and then the fork would open, and they keep doing that to get the hay up into the barn. And here's Stanley Reynolds and Max Dwyer. You can see he's holding the reins of a horse that they cut that by hand and gotten the log out. Certainly looks like a lot of work. And then by the 50s, they had a Farmall M tractor, and that's my dad baling hay there. This is what the driveway of the farm looked like before the fire in 1951. And those of you that grew up around here know that Stanley Reynolds raised a lot of pigs. That building now is where I have a farm museum with a lot of the old tools and things that our ancestors never threw away. So if anyone wants to come and visit the museum and see the old tools and whatnot, just let me know. And the Vern Mitchell farm, that burned in 1967. I still remember hearing the phone ring in the middle of the night. It was in January, I believe. And the fire there, that's one of the few pictures we have of that farm. Now we're going to go over to Old Village Road. If you come up Little Mohawk Road here, if you take the first right off of it, there's Old Village Road. And that's where one of the first church, I think the first church was, and the cemetery. This was the Severance Tavern sometime before 1800. And you can see the people are all dressed up and they have their horse out there. Charlie Clark had a farm there on Old Village Road, and this is him with one of his horses. People were very proud of their horses back then and liked to get them in the picture. This picture was taken at the Cyrus Bardwell farm on Old Village Road. That's my grandfather, Stanley Reynolds, digging potatoes. But in the background, you can see that Cyrus Bardwell raised a lot of gladiolas. He's the only person that I know of that raised flowers commercially back then. Okay, now we're going to go over to Frank Williams Road. So if you go up Little Mohawk Road, you can take an Old Village Road, you can take a right and go onto Frank Williams Road, or you could get there from Route 2, go up quite a steep hill, and get to Frank Williams Road. This was the Wheeler Farm, now the Josh Simpson Farm. This is a picture from 1931. Before that, there was a different building there. There was the Nims Tavern. As I said, there were a lot of taverns in town. And at the Nims Tavern, they used to have the town meetings for several years. And in 1769, 3 articles on the town warrant were to discuss whether they should let pigs, sheep, and cattle run freely in the town commons. I don't know where the town commons was. If anybody does, it'd be interesting to know. But but that's the type of things they were discussing in 1769. A lot of this information is in the book, The History and Tradition of Shelburne, and in the back there's a table that has that book and an album of pictures and some little papers that have the Earl for the book. It's all online. You can go and look through the whole book. Merton Wheeler moved there in the early 1900s, and this is him driving some of the horses in the snow. This is a picture of Leland and Donald Wheeler from 1928. And another picture of Merton. He seemed to like to stand up to drive his horses. And then John Wheeler, when he was 12 years old, showing his calf at Northampton Fairgrounds. Also on Frank Williams Road is the Frank Williams, the home of Peter and Faith Williams now. That was a picture of their house and the well, I'm not sure of the year. And then Peter Williams had the Jersey and other breeds of cattle for many years. Back on Route 2, this is a picture of the Gagnon farm. It's across from where the Shelburne Springs is now, across from what used to be the Anchorage Nursing Home, right on the Mohawk Trail. And there's, okay. And then, whoops. Okay, Mohawk Trail. And then off of the Coleraine Shelburne Road, there's a road to the right that's called Carpenter Road. It's where Raymond Carpenter first farmed, and then Joe Long had the farm. It's now where Allison Williams Allen family lives. But you can see all the board fences, the horse hitched up to the carriage. And the very famous part of that farm was Abigail of Hillside. She was a Jersey cow that was world champion with 23,677 pounds of milk and 1,197.5 pounds of butter fat. With the picture, there was all the information about the cow. It didn't say who the people are. And that seems to be the way with the famous cattle that we had here in Shelburne. So this is a poem that I found in the album that Lonnie York loaned me, and it tells about being a farmer. These next two pictures were ones that I got from the Historical Society. They show the oxen and the big pile of hay. I have no idea who the people are or where they are. If anyone recognizes them as their ancestors, please let me know. And another one with some longhorn oxen here. Got the whole gang on the trailer. It'd be nice to know who they are. We're going to go over through Peckville now. You can get to Peckville if you go off of Route 2 and around, or off of the Coleraine Shelburne Road and go around this way. It's in North Shelburne, Peckville, and then we'll go over on to Wilson Graves Road. So the Doles and Redekers, a lot of the Pecks, that's why it's called Peckville, had orchards, and some of them, the names changed to Dole and Redeker. They had an orchard for many years, and that's their house there on Peckville Road. These are the grandparents of Tim Smith, Doris Willis Peck and Lyndon Austin Peck. The apex, I believe, came from Austin Peck, A. Peck Orchards on Peckville Road. I wanted to thank them for donating the cider for today. Here's Tim and Marcia Smith having some apples a long time ago. And here's their picking crew. I'm not sure what the year was there, but you see the little dog in the basket. Apex Orchards is still going strong there on Peckville Road. There's some of the apples blossoming. Totally different way of farming now than the big old apple trees where they use the 30-foot ladder. Now they're the smaller trees. And there's their new farm store there where you can see the view. If you think about that view, here it is prior to that. Before Apex Orchards had that land, it was Valley View Farm owned by Abner Peck. And before they did the apples, they had cattle there. So this Marvin and Harvey Peck on Peckville Road. Here's Harvey Peck at 6 months old. You notice the wicker baby carriage. For those of you that know where the textile factory is in Greenfield, you take a right at Dunkin' Donuts and go out that road. That, where the textile factory is, used to be a wicker baby carriage factory until 1934. Here's a house that was built by Abner Peck, and like many others at the time, that one burned. But you can see they're out there, got their horse to show off in the beautiful house. Here's Abner Peck with Marvin, Harvey, and Bill Peck on their horse in 1940. I had never heard of Bill Peck. I'd heard of the others, and we talked with Harvey Peck recently, and he said Bill Peck went to MIT and studied aeronautics, and he'd gone, everywhere, and that's why we hadn't heard of them. But Marvin and Harvey stayed and had an orchard there. Here's Harvey Peck, one of my favorite pictures. He just played in the dirt. Children grow up in such a sterile environment now that they're allergic to everything, but just go let them play in the dirt. And here's the cow Harriet and Harvey by the silo. You look at the size of the cow's udder, amazing. This picture had no information about the people. It had all the information about this Mariah Inca cow and all her records. Fortunately, Barbara Jaguar filled in the names for me of Abner and Grace Peck and Charles, and then Russ and Harvey and Bill Peck, all there in 1949. But this cow was one with, very high milk records. And here's all the Pecks getting in corn. Abner Peck and sons Marvin and Harvey, and then some of Roger Peck's girls had the dark hair, and Lyndon Peck's girls had the lighter hair. But they got the whole crew in the picture there. Now we'll go over to Wilson Graves Road, which is off of the Brook Road that goes down the back way to Greenfield. Go to Graves Glen Farm. It's been in the Graves family since 1762. The original house is there. And here's the Graves family, the 9 generations involved in this. This was from 2007. Here's an older picture of the Graves family. I'm not sure where the picture was taken, but you see all the horses and wagons and things. And
Carolyn?
Yes.
That's on Light Road in Grayfield. That's my ancestry down there. It's the Ronnie Wright farm. And they bottled their own milk and delivered it. They had the wagon there for the delivery in Grayfield. The barn had been burned like 3 times, even when the Ronnie Wright's family had it. And Duradell owned it one time. A lot of the furniture was made there by Alonzo Graves that's in the farmhouse in Shelburne now. The secretary's tables and things like that. And they had a water-powered elevator in there. Duradell had, his wife was an invalid, and she had to go up to the 2nd story to use a pump. And they turn the water on, the cylinder goes up through, and then they shut the water off, and it comes back, and the elevator goes.
Great. Well, thanks for that information, Jim. It's a beautiful picture with all the horses and wagons and things. Here's the Gray family picking apples, and you can see back in the early 1900s that it was the standard size apple tree, so you had a 20 or 30-foot ladder to climb up to pick the apples. And now they've changed to the dwarf trees that are so much easier and safer to pick. But it looks like they had the whole crew out for that. We're going to go down to South Shelburne now. So from Shelburne Center, you can go across Route 2 and down to South Shelburne. And this road is Barnard Road. It ends up where the Kingsburys used to be. And then there's Bartles Ferry Road that goes down and across. It used to have the Bartles Ferry Bridge where you could go across into Conway. That's closed now. And then there's Taylor Road up this way and South Shelburne Road. So we'll get to some of the farms there. This is Centerview Farm on Barnard Road. It's off of Shelburne Center Road. This is Pat and Skinny Barnard. And nobody ever knew what their real names were, but Joanne Wheeler found somewhere that their real names were Alva and Alan. They were twin boys, neither of them ever married. But when they were small, their mother started calling them Fatty and Skinny. And then it turned out to be Fat and Skinny, and then he decided, I guess it was better, Pat and Skinny. But everyone in town knew them as Pat and Skinny Barnard and didn't know their real names. But here's a little team of oxen that they have, and here they are sitting on the oxen when they got a little bit older. And another picture there from Centerview Farm with the oxen and the big yoke on it. So as you go down Bartles Ferry Road, off to the right, there's a little road called Bassett Road. This was the first homestead there. It's now the home of the Ashendens, Becky Ashenden, where she teaches a lot of weaving classes and always has a barn fest in the fall. A wonderful place to go and visit. And at the barn fest, they have a lot of the old-time crafts. She'll have someone, a blacksmith and other woodworkers, some oxen there to pull a wagon. A great place to go any time of year. But Barn Fest, you should put that on your list of things to do. Farther down on Bartles Ferry Road, this is a picture of Fred Richardson, 1870s style, haying there. And this is from an old newspaper article that was a picture taken by John Heron, the mother of John Heron now. I happened to run into Russell Richardson the other day when I was down in South Shelburne, and he gave me these next several pictures. This was the Richardson house in 1900, with the traditional porch rocker on the front. And this is Russell Richardson's grandfather, Clarence Richardson. I mean, he's sitting on the horse without even a saddle and his bare feet, but obviously that's what he liked to do. Another Richardson family picture of the horse hitched up with the wagon and the children out there. And no one knew who this little kid is on the big horse, but Russell just said this was little kid on big horse. But here you can see all the harnesses, the horse collar, the tugs, the back strap, all that you needed to do to fix up a horse so that you could drive it. It's certainly a lot easier now to just get in a car or truck and turn the key. But they really valued their horses then. And that same, well, this might be Paul Richardson, he said, on the sap tank. Another Richardson family shoveling snow in 1930. They got everybody out there to do that. And then getting a Christmas tree. And someone has his bugle out there, it looks like. But certainly having a good time with that. And for those of you that would rather see engines than horses, this was a picture of Russell Richardson's namesake in 1945 on his motorcycle. So you can see he's got the saddlebags there. But look in the distance and you see how clear the land was relative to the way it is now. And I forgot to mention earlier that early on, Shelburne was part of Deerfield, and the people in Deerfield regarded Shelburne as the northwest pasture, thinking that the land up here was only good for pasture compared to Deerfield. Foxguard Farm, operated by the Payne family for many years on Bridle Ferry Road. It's a brick house there, and here's their barn that's still there today as it was in this picture. John Payne, many of you probably knew him. This was a picture of him with, it looks like a Jersey animal. And then his father, Sam Payne, at Foxguard Farm with a Hereford. And another picture, just they were loading manure with the old kind of loader on the tractor. Farther down on Bridle Ferry Road was Lawrence Holy's farm. Now Jim and Diantha Holy. There's a old picture of the barn. This is the way they were putting in hay in 1953. Fortunately, they invented the hay baler, so by the 50s there was baled hay, much easier to load and deal with than the old loose hay. And another picture of the Holeys haying in 1953. You see the old tractor and truck out there. And then Jim Holy baling hay in 1964. My father-in-law, Leonard Wheeler, always used to say, the two best inventions were the chainsaw and the hay baler. It made life a lot easier. Many of you have heard of Lila Bardwell. She wrote many of the history books of Shelburne, Vanished Homes of Shelburne, As You Were, Shelburne, a historian about many of the things in the town. And this was her father's, the animal values in 1897. A cow was $25 or $35. A horse was quite valuable. That was $100. Fat pig, fat hog, $18. A team of oxen, $135. Here's another one from 1849. Orsimus Bardwell, and he purchased some things from the Joel Bardwell estate, but you can see the prices back then much different than they are now. None of the pictures that I saw ever showed any animals for pleasure. The only one that I have in any of the pictures that I've seen was the Bardwells with this pony. They had horses for work, but very few had them just for pleasure. Green Valley Farm was where Lila Bardwell grew up, the Bardwell family. It's now where the Cosbys live, and there's some pictures here of that farm. And another picture just of the scenery there. And how they did the corn. They tied up the corn so that it would dry. They probably cut it with the corn knife. And that was the road getting to Lila Bardwell's farm. Now we'll go down. This is Bardwell's Ferry. Bardwell's Ferry Road goes down here from Shelburne Center, and then down farther off of it is Hawks Road, where the parents live, and then off of Bardwell's Ferry Road, there's a corner, and here's Taylor Road over this way. So this is the Hawks Heron Farm in 1906. That house and barn are still there. You can see the tall barn with the cupola on top. There's the farmhouse, and you can see what the roads were like. I'm not sure what year this is. And another picture of the barn there with the high roof and the cupola. Now, off of Taylor Road was Manners Road, Guy Manners Road. This is Harold Manners when he was 2 years old. I love the little outfit, the way they dressed the children then. Later on, there was what was called a Jersey Field Day at Harold Manners. A field day was when people would bring their best animal, and they'd line them up, and they'd have a judge there to say which animal they thought was the best. So I don't know if anyone recognizes anyone in the picture, and I don't know what year this was. But there were far more cattle in Shelburne years ago. How many of you have ever heard of blowing ditches? Okay. I don't see any hands there. Well, this is a picture of blowing ditches at Harold Manners in 1926. And we talked with Gordon Taylor about this. He's either 95 or 96, and asked him, what he knew about it. And he just matter-of-factly said, oh, sure, you dig as much as you could, and then you just go buy some dynamite and lay it where you want it to go and light it off and make a ditch. In the conversation, a lot of times I guess the dirt would just fall on both sides. If it was dirt, if it was rocks, then it might go anywhere. But blowing ditches was a common practice back then. I don't think you could buy the dynamite now. Another Harold Manners picture. You notice the lady out there in her skirt, helping to put the loose hay up on the horses, or up on the wagon, I mean. And there's, from Manners Farm looking down toward Taylor's, They had the hay all raped there. Many of you probably know Gordon Taylor or Gordon and Marion.
That's all beaver pond now.
Oh yes, you're right, that is the beaver pond now. Across from where Beth Manning lives now, it's a beaver pond. Yes. But Gordon and Helen Taylor were very active in all town affairs, did a lot in the Grange, the church, everything. I believe Gordon's either 95 or 96 now. Marion. Gordon and Marion, yes. So here's a picture of Gordon from his high school yearbook in 1930. I wondered why they called him Shorty, and he says because he played shortstop for all his 4 years in high school. His farm was called Shingle Brook Farm, where they had milking shorthorns. The best bloodlines in Shelburne, Mass. They also had some sheep. Those are some of the kids showing the sheep there. And here's one of the shorthorns that they had, Waldgrove, a record 2,500 pound bull owned by George Taylor. They also had one cow that I don't have a picture of, but it won all the local fairs, Greenfield, Northampton, Springfield Fair. Then it was sold and went to Missouri, where it won at the fairs there. And the person who owned it also took it to Canada. And it won awards there also. So a lot of very impressive cattle in Shelburne years ago. Here's some others of the shorthorn cattle that they had. And the bottom picture obviously was at a fair. You could see some kind of rides there in the background. Gordon Taylor's nephew gave us these medals to go in our farm museum at home. And these were given in 1919, some to Elliot Taylor, and some to Dorothy Taylor for awards that they won at the Agricultural Society. The last road we're going on is South Shelburne Road and the Kelly Farm. This is a picture, I'm not sure what year this was, but long ago on the Kelly Farm. And another picture of the Kelly Farm from out in the pasture. Also, they had a truck to get hay when Ernie and his sister Joyce were young. I think that's Joyce and her two children sitting on the hay there. Another Kelly Farm picture, spreading manure. That's what people had to do to fertilize their fields, so certainly a common practice. And then the Kelly family, and I think that's Pat Skinny Barnard as older people visiting with the Kellys on their porch there. And Ernie Kelly and his daughter Leah, Ernie's here today, almost 80, so this was a while ago that this picture was taken, but nice picture of Ernie and his daughter. The last farm is the York Farm on South Shelburne Road. Lonnie Gould York and Tony York. And here's a load of the loose hay being pulled by a tractor. Tony York as a child with the ducks. And then Lonnie and one of her open farm days with guests there. The York Farm is the closest we have in town to Old MacDonald's farm. She has the ducks, the chicks, the sheep, the lambs, the cows and calves and horses and pigs and a whole variety of animals, and opens her farm in the spring so that people can come and see all of those animals. just a great farm with a lot of variety, where they work really hard. And the last picture, here's Barnes, the treasure at the end of the rainbow. Thank you all.
Thank you.